You're all having a good Tuesday. I'm going to go through this. Sheets has got one more night where he's out. Should be back hopefully most of the week, but we'll be good for recording and stuff like that. And obviously with baseball, the late news is not nearly as relevant as basketball. We will talk some basketball as well. I did want to remind everybody we've got some great packages up there right now. We've got a free trial going, so check that out. And it's a free trial for everything. You get the entire Saber Sim Ultimate package, all of Sheets' stuff, all of Goldie's stuff, my content, Roadies, Brandon Cruz for NASCAR, who's been just crushing it. So yeah, I would advise you guys to take a look at that when you have a minute. So, all right. So the real question tonight is when it comes to, for me, my lineups in baseball are, who is my SP2? Pablo Lopez is my highest owned player. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone. Obviously, every pitcher has some risk, but that's the one I feel most comfortable with. Everybody else is really tough for me. I like Grayson Rodriguez, but I also think that it's a high price point. Same with Stroman. Stroman with the low strikeouts, it's kind of hard to get excited about that. I think Gausman I actually like Gausman, and his price on FanDuel is there. I think he's getting back to himself. He had his highest velocity game in his last start. I think he's getting himself back under control here. So I'm going to get into all that. And basically I have pieces of all these guys. That's why I'm struggling, especially in my high buy-in. Max Fried, I feel like, is a reasonably safe, but uninspiring pick. Like, I feel like Max Fried and Stroman are a similar play, although Fried struggled more to start the season so far. I like Logan Webb. Currently, I have Logan Webb as my SP2 in my biggest buy-in alongside of Pablo Lopez. But I'm thinking about doing something different and getting more Dane Dunning exposure. I already have a decent amount, but I'm going to keep going that direction. I've got 20% plus of Dunning, 10% of Canning. My really crazy, get weird, large field play is Ryan Feltner. He's been really good with the strikeouts, and I think it's worth taking a gamble on him at 6,400 at zero ownership. I just think that it makes just enough sense for me to get there. Anyways, that's what I've got. I'm going to in terms of my actual ownership, I'll do a comparing real quick, and I'll answer the questions that I see popping up in chat. My ownership of my pitchers, my highest owned is Lopez. Second highest owned is Gausman. Basically just above Dunning, Fried, and Logan Webb, all similar, around 20%. Then I've got Canning, Feltner, Rodriguez, Severino, King. I have 10% of King right now. I actually was going to go a little higher, and I might end up, getting a little bit more. I was all over this guy. It just feels weird to play the chalk at Coors in sort of for a guy who's kind of a volatile pitcher coming off of, I believe, his career high in pitches thrown. So just something to consider, to get, just trying to find ways to get a little bit different. But it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard at pitching to really nail the right pieces. I am going to stick with, like I said, 50% plus of Lopez, because I don't feel great about everybody else. And I do like the idea of having Gausman as my second highest owned. And I'm using Gausman as my main pitcher on FanDuel. I'm probably going to look to Logan Webb or Dane Dunning as my SP2 in my big buy-in. I just want to get a little bit different there, even though I may not need to, because we'll get into why in a minute. You can see the highest owned players on the slate are Houston. I am below the field on Houston. I don't have none of it, but I have less of it in stacks, and where I do have it stacked, it's mostly mini stacks. I like the lefty with Tucker, Alvarez. They're both really good against lefties. That doesn't bother me. Never bothered me anyway. Diaz, obviously, Altuve. Those would be the preferred Houston bats if you're going to get to them. But I like the idea of my main stack today is St. Louis, and their ownership is kind of ticked up a little bit. Let's see what Goldie has them at. Goldie only has one player above 10%. I think it's pretty reasonable to be in that range. But I like that. It's not a team I usually stack. I like the matchup against Henry. I feel like you have a really nice pairing with Arenado, Contreras, Goldschmidt, all affordable because they haven't hit partially. And then you get the Mason Wynn in there for the value. And then it's easy to add one more piece, whether it be Donovan or if you want to go down with Jordan Walker. Just hope he finally breaks out of that slump. Nolan Gorman, Lars Nootbaar, etc. All of these guys will make lineups of mine. I really like the stack. It's the stack I'm the most overweight on at the moment. Second for me is the Cubs. And I actually think I like the Cubs a little better. I think they'll be a little bit higher owned, and they're just a little bit harder to get to than St. Louis. Not necessarily harder, but it's weird because I don't really want to use a first base spot on Mervis, but he sort of makes it work. So I'm using a little bit of it. I'm not thrilled about like some of the pricing and stuff, but I do like Michael Busch and the tear he's been on. I have some Tauchman. He's going to be the lowest owned one. That's a way to get a little lower ownership in that Cubs stack. So that's what I've got as my number 2 in terms of ownership. As far as the rest of my stacks go, I'm just going to take a quick look at my positions and see. Yeah, Cubs, Cardinals. I have Minnesota, but more as a mini stack or complementary stack than I do as a main stack. And then I've got Atlanta as another main stack. So I guess I call Atlanta my 3rd favorite main stack. I'm not getting to San Diego as stacks today. I do have little 2-man, one-ops and things like that, but I'm not getting to San Diego. I understand the theory of getting to the Rockies. It's not a good hitting game for, Colorado-wise. It's still better than most parks, but so taking a shot, I can certainly not fault you for. But there's a lot of good offenses here. Like the one I wanted to get to the most that I didn't end up getting to was Baltimore. And I might even go back after the thing. I thought they were going to be a little bit higher owned. And I think that's a really interesting team to take a shot on here. They've got huge potential, tons of power in that lineup. And I think they're an interesting route to go if you're not going to go my way. I'm not in on this Seattle thing. I really honestly don't understand it. And even if it happens or not tonight, I just think that everything seems way too much to me. I'm not doing that. So I'm actually off of most of the chalk with my hitting, not all of it, but most of it. And that's the way I'm sort of getting different, just to go through positions before I get into all the QQs and everything like that. Let's see who I've got the most. I'm going to measure up my exposures and see who I've got. And I'm going to update my exposure. Is still going to change. I've got like 50% lineups with Cardinals right now. It's probably going to end up more like 30. Right now I've got Contreras, d'Arnaud, Moreno, Diaz, Rushman, Amaya. Those are my main catchers, or those are my catchers in terms of ownership. First base, I have Goldschmidt, Bush, Pavin Smith, Kirilloff, Olsen, Mervis. Second base, Horner, Donovan, Gorman, Julian, Altuve, Fletcher, and Nicky Lopez for value. Third base, I have Arenado, Willie Castro, Austin Riley, Suarez, Morel. Actually, I like third base more than I usually do, more than I have so far this year today. I think that you're going to get a few third baseman hits and home runs tonight. Shortstop, Mason Wynn is my highest owned guy. The price, he can always steal a bag if he gets on. And Willie Castro being the other one who's the other value play. Dansby Swanson, Jeremy Pena, and Ha-Seong Kim. Outfield for me is Bellinger and Acuna at the top. Then Larnach, Nootbaar, Donovan, Ozuna, Happ, Jordan Walker, Kirilloff, Duvall, Gurriel, McCormick, Michael Harris, Varsho, etc. You guys get the picture. So, Travis, you know what? It is. I get why it would seem ridiculous to play Oakland. I'm not playing any Oakland stacks. Just don't get them. Just X them out if you don't want to play them. I'm not playing Oakland today. If it happens, it happens. Whatever. Brandon, I am going to try and get some showdown lineups in when I get off this, if I can get my baseball lineup set in time. So I would like to. I have. If you want to jump on and talk about basketball, yeah, Brandon, jump on right now. We could talk some showdown and then we can lead that into the main slate. But I wasn't going to talk showdown because it's definitely the least interesting part of the night for me. But I'm happy to talk a little showdown if you're able to. So let's do that if you're able to jump on in, because that's most of what I have for baseball. Baseball tends to run pretty quickly. I went through basically exactly what I have that I'm doing today. Other stacks, I mentioned Baltimore as one that I would have gotten to. Colorado, I think, is an interesting one. Arizona, Toronto, and maybe a piece of the Yankees or two, I guess. But those would be the ones that are on the outside looking in for me. Right, great to have Brandon coming on in a minute. I'll start with my main slate look, and then we'll transfer over when Brandon gets here for basketball, and he'll talk a little bit about some of the showdown stuff. All right, so you can see I did some building earlier today, and this is the part that I did script, and now I'm going to whittle these down. They're all going to be edited, etc. And this is the ownership that I ended up with. Now I forced some other things in my big buy-ins. I have some different stuff going. Just in, I don't have Jaden McDaniels in my big buy-in currently. I think it's, I'm playing it more as, okay, I'll eat some of the chalk somewhere. Usually I would do that in my big buy-in, but I don't like him any real better than Royce O'Neal. So I think they're very similar plays. Anyway, as you can see, they're the two highest owned players on my list. And you could see why I got them, because I wanted exposure to a lot of the studs here tonight. 45% Lillard, I think that's probably lower than I'm going to be. 45% Beverly, I think that's probably lower than I'm going to be. 40% Siakam, that's probably lower than I'm going to be. Paul George, I'm going way overweight. We don't know what the hell is happening with Kawhi, and I'm just speculating that he's out. So I'm forcing in the Paul George. You can see what I did with the Clippers. I basically have George, Man, or Westbrook in all my lineups. I do have a couple of those together, but I'm sorry, George, Harden, or Westbrook, and often multiples. I have obviously like Zubac, Norman Powell. I just want to be well overweight the Clippers, and I think there's more of an opportunity for some of these other guys. We saw Terrence Mann with a big game the other night. I think I could easily flip over to Westbrook or Powell. Westbrook was pretty good the other night too. But first half, I think he had a huge first half, but didn't do much in the second half as they were trying to preserve the lead. But I like getting overweight at these Clippers. You can see I'm well overweight. I don't understand this ownership. I understand it because Paul George is maybe playing or not. This looks right. Goldie's ownership, I think, is going to be closer to 20%. Because even if Leonard plays, I still like Terrence Mann. So I'm okay with that play, just because I like these 4K guys. Yes, it's guard eligible, not forward eligible like the other guys. I like Royce O'Neal and McDaniels. I think it's where people are going to use it. So they're not going to be able to use it as much on Mann. So I like that. As you can see, I got a little bit above the field. Like I have 25% of Towns here, 25% Luka, 25% Norman Powell again on that same speculation. A little underweight on Neesmith. That seems like a high projection for Neesmith to be that high owned. I don't mind it. Like, it just seems like a little too high to me. Overweight Zubac, et cetera, et cetera. This is sort of what I'm doing. And then I did try to force in a little more Beal, Durant, Booker, because I knew they'd be the low owned of the bunch, lower than the rest, I should say. I actually have Bradley Beal in my main build for what it's worth, so I actually have more of it than it seems right there. So that's sort of a rundown of what I'm doing, but we can talk about some of these thin plays. And Brandon just popped in. We'll let me pull up the showdown screen. Brandon, how you doing, man?
Hello. I'm doing well.
Nice. We'll get into some showdown stuff. I'll go by each one, because while I haven't prepared for showdown yet, I've done on these big slates. I'm sorry, on these little slates where you have to find ways to get different. I'm using a ton of speculative guys who are like 5%, or a number of speculative guys at 5% owned or less, and those guys are much more valuable in these showdown slates. So maybe I can talk myself off of some of my ownership that I have of them over there and more into the showdown. But you're playing all three slates? Give me a rundown of what you're doing tonight.
So I'm going to play the Phoenix and Minnesota slate, and then the Mavericks and Clippers slate. I'm not interested in the Indiana Pacers slate at all.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. Just because that. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that's the most high variance. I feel like that could be the most fun.
And for me, because I saw that it was high variance, and I didn't like the contest that they had today. Yeah. Like the first showdown slate typically has like contests that fill at like noon or 1 o'clock in the morning, and so you basically get more contests for the first and last showdown games. And so typically I don't play the middle one at all.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so like that's why I like focus on like showdown more, just because I feel like I can have a better chance at actually making money on some of these nights and stuff.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Definitely.
And especially now because it's like playoff. I mean, you and Sheets talked about this yesterday and stuff, but or even today, like in the playoffs, like all the points are actually like realistically projected. Like DFS points are realistically projected for the players. Like we don't have, some guy getting ready to sit or whatever. Like everybody has to play these games, and so scoring is very much centralized around 7 to 8 guys, and so it's just easier to like build lines for them.
Yep, absolutely. No, I agree. And with that said, so let's talk about the Phoenix Minnesota game. Like one thing that I always flirt with doing, and then I try to decide whether there's enough upside in it, is if I can get enough of and I think this game is a category for it, where it would be nice to get, I think, both Booker and Durant. If you could get a Booker, Durant, and Beal with like an Edwards on the other side, that would be really hard to do unless you do like a Royce O'Neal as your captain or something. Eric Gordon as your captain, something bizarre, cheap. Do you go that route, or are you going for your most productive player in the captain? I know it's a hard question to ask generally, but in this game tonight, will your captain more likely be the spend ups or the spend all the way downs and try to get them as many in as you can?
So this is why I kind of felt like coming on and talking today, because like I very much like don't even pay attention to the names. Like I'm very much just projection and numbers based here. And
Sure.
so like at least for me when and I haven't built either, but this is like my process of what I would go through. So like actually can I bring my screen up?
Yeah. I'll
It'll
stop.
be the Sabersim thing, but I can just
No, perfect.
show what I
Let
do.
me stop my share. Hold on. There we go.
Okay, so like whenever I look onto an NBA slate, like I said, I'm not even looking at the names. What I typically do first is I look at the captain projected points. Now we're using SaberSim's projections here. Typically, I'll use Goldies or Sheets whenever I
Sure.
actually build my lines, but this will be a great example. So typically, what I do is I look at the captain projected first, and I do the same thing in F1 and in esports and stuff. And I look at the discrepancy between the scoring of the like the differences between the four highest projected guys, like where are the gaps. Typically if the most expensive guy has a pretty big gap on the field, I typically chase him as the captain. Whereas like yesterday, like when you had the Lakers and Nuggets playing, like you had
Jokic.
Jokic, you had AD and LeBron all within like the same points. And
Right.
so it's very unlikely that Jokic is able to just pull away and run away. And so that would very much lean towards, play. And ironically enough, like LeBron James was the winning captain with somebody scoring a 0 at 1,000. But the highest scoring lineups that actually have all six players scoring, one had LeBron, and then the other ones are like Porter, Russell, and things of that nature. And so typically, like if the optimal lineup has somebody scoring 0, I'm not going to play them because I don't score 0 players
Right.
where people projected to score. And so when I look at a slate like this and I see that typically these three guys are looking pretty similar right now, that leans to me. I'm not playing. I don't want to have any Edwards as the captain. I don't want any Durant as the captain because Booker and Durant are basically the exact same plays. And so just right off the bat, I'm like, okay, these guys are X'd out of the captain. And so that is most likely going to mean that I'm either going to start getting a lot of Booker or a lot of these like mid-tier plays, which at that point I start looking at where they're at priced on utility. Because in my head, I can be like, or understand, okay, I'm playing like mid-range guys from like low 9s to 8s to 7. And so after I do that, I typically just remove all these bottom guys. Like I said, it's very unlikely that this Jordan Feller, this young guy, like it's very unlikely that these guys actually score anything. Like if they go off, like okay, whatever, I miss them, whatever. But because I'm removing, a 2,000, 1,000, 1,000, 24, that's showing me, or that would lean towards those builds not necessarily either having an expensive captain or like truly punting. And so when I'm looking at who I'm probably going to end up playing here, I think it's going to be a sense of a lot of the lines I end up playing are probably going to be like Rudy, Cat, possibly Bradley Beal, and really capping around this range. At least that's like where I'm at. So that's like usually the first thing that I do before I build lines, before I even look at the names of the players. I just look at what the projected points are, and then once I've done that, I can see, okay, clearly I'm going to be pretty different from the field just by doing that because Cat or Anthony Edwards is the highest projected captain. So like clearly, like right off the bat, I'm already different. That's typically what I do in every slate, and that's why I wanted to show my screen so I could like walk through that.
Yeah, no, I like that. And that makes a lot of sense. The only thing I would change, the only reason I would poke back a little bit about the playoffs is if you have a guy for 1,000 who gets 6 points or 0 points like last night, you're going to get so much production from the spend all the way ups. And this is a tougher game specifically because you have like a situation where the actual, I mean, look, you have three guys within 3.5 points of each other, sort of like you were saying, like last night's game with the Lakers, where everybody at the top is sort of bunched together. And then everybody you spend down for, there's like a lot of speculative plays. Like, I don't know. So it's like, I still think like trying to get it like 5 of the guys, like for me, like my first thing trying to look at it would be to try, how do I get Edwards, Durant, Booker, all in one lineup comfortably, and then like the rest of my lineup. because I do think you're getting more times than not at 150 out of those guys, and they'll do majority of the scoring. There's a chance that nobody else scores 60% of what they score tonight. Now, it doesn't mean you can't win with those guys, those other guys as captains or whatever. But that's just sort of why I would say maybe it is a case to look a little different and spend down, at least for me, on I don't know, Royce O'Neal or Jaden McDaniels, probably Royce O'Neal in my case, and try to get those other 5 guys in those other spots, or try to captain Durant because he'll be the lowest owned of the 3 guys in that range. Meanwhile, his projection is basically the same, and he could easily be the highest scoring player in this game. But he's getting half the ownership of Edwards, and that's more perception based. I mean, he's more realistically, Edwards is going to outscore him more often. But you know, if you're getting 2.5 times, I think it's enough of a thing to take a shot on Durant. But if you did that, you would end up getting into some weird builds with you'll end up with basically the same builds as a lot of people, that the people who end up playing Eric Gordon, Drew Eubanks, guys like that in the utility spot. But I think it's worth gambling on sometimes if a guy, you know, maybe there's a coaching adjustment. This is probably not the right game to use as an example. Like if we were talking about, we'll talk about Dallas in a minute tonight, but like Josh Green may legitimately play like 5 minutes, and there's a lot of speculation that he might get a huge boost in minutes. You know what I mean? Taking a chance on something like that, I think is worth it in the playoffs, because the other 5 players on your showdown lineup are going to be scoring so many of the points almost all the time. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, it does. So I want to ask you, based on like, you know, the speculative plays, the value plays. So like for today, I'm X'd out a lot of the guys because their projections are low. Like last night, like Gabe Vincent I forgot what his projection was, but typically if it's over like 4 or like 4.5, I typically keep them in.
Right.
And even if they underperform, like that's fine. At least for me, and really what I did a lot last year was like, when I'm just looking at straight projections, if I have somebody projected for like 1.25 points, like that type of risk, yet again, I mean, it's speculative play. That's where you come in, as like, you actually know ball. I'm just here like, what is a rebound? Why is that even a stat? It's just picking up the ball. Do we count fumble recoveries as like a DFS stat? Like that's where I'm at in terms of basketball. But like today, like Morris is projected to be at like 4.26 points. I know he's like 2,400, but if whatever projection source that I'm using at least projects somebody to be at 4 or 5 or 3, that shows me that, okay, they're at least going to be there. Sure, like speculative, you know, if they work or not, like whatever. But I typically lean into those a lot more than like a 1.2 player projected point or whatever. At least that's where I'm at. And so like, I'm kind of just answering your question of why I've like, I would just X people out and stuff. And
no,
maybe I'm,
you know. And a guy like Morris is like most likely, look, they won game 1. He played 9 minutes. He scored 10 fantasy points. You'd be very happy with that today if you're using him as a filler piece, you know. Same thing with Eubanks on the other side. I think Eubanks is probably the better play because there's an outside chance Minnesota plays 2 bigs. Any foul trouble from Nurkic, or if they want to even go a different version of small but fast, Eubanks will end up playing. He'd be the guy I would go with if I had to pick between, you know, those 2. I also think Eric Gordon but he's more of a logical one. He's one that actually people are going to own. Those are just of the guys who no one's going to really, you know, the Thaddeus Young, Bol, Jordan McLaughlin, all 3 of those guys probably don't play at all. After all 4 of those guys, but I probably would agree with Xing them out, with the exception of maybe the Phoenix overcorrects and decides to give Bol some run. They did let him play 3 minutes in the first game, because there's a chance these teams will make some corrections. I mean, it is weird. You know, they got smoked in game 1. They're on the road. We don't know how Nurkic is really going to fit in this series. He only played 26 minutes. Eubanks, and then maybe they'll give Bol a little bit of that run. I think it's possible. Anyway, something I considered. But he's again one fantasy point projection, or 2 fantasy point projected, who probably doesn't play, but if he plays, will, you know, is likely to score at least 5 or 6 fantasy points. And I know these sound like silly numbers, guys, but they actually do make a difference when you're trying to get that many studs or near studs in your lineup. But I think like maybe, so this seems like the builds you're going to end up with more. Let me just guess here. You're going to end up with more Towns, Gobert, which I do like the Towns a lot. I actually like Gobert too, but I just think Towns has the best upside of any of the non-studs. He'd probably be my captain if I had to pick another one. And Towns Gobert, you're going to end up with Bradley Beal. You'll probably end up with some Conley, some Nurkic, Naz Reid. Guys like that, I feel like are going to be pretty prevalent in your lineups based on how you were describing your build. Is that accurate?
So this is the second step that I normally do, and this is why I took the screen off, because I don't know if these are going to be lines that I actually play or not. But and yet again, this is off of the SaberSim projections. But now that I've ran everything, I typically do two things. Of one, I just want to look at the highest projected lineups as like a baseline. I understand that I have a very high likelihood of getting like true punts as the captain, which I will not play those lineups. But I mainly want to see how well like either Booker lineups or Cat lineups, like where those guys kind of fall in line, and that'll usually dictate kind of where like my realistic lines will probably end up running into. And so once I've done that, I see that I have quite a lot of Edwards, quite a lot of Gobert, Booker, and then Durant are probably the most likely guys to actually work in this situation. At least like just and early on stuff. And then at that point, I'd kind of goof around, or I'd use a different projection source or run contest sims. But this is typically what I do for a slate like this. I want to talk about Dallas and the Clippers, like whenever we're done with this, because it's like a drastically different approach. That's why I love Showdown.
Right.
But I think I'm probably going to end up on Edwards and Gobert. And it's looking like Booker is probably the better of the pay-ups based on this stuff just early. Looking at it.
I slightly prefer Booker over Durant for what it's worth, but it's very, very close for those two to me. Dallas, you have the complete opposite situation where there's a player who's, projected to outscore everybody by 25 fantasy points, basically. So how do you treat a situation? I'll share my screen for this one, unless you want to.
I'll share it because I'm not showing lines. So on this one, I don't know why I took it off then. So on this one, when I see Luka as just like the clear all, like here, this is like a situation where, as I walked through the last one, I was like, okay, things are close. We can kind of X out the more expensive guy and yada, yada, yada. When I come to a situation like this, to where even if Luka in the captain's, he doesn't have to score 90, but if he scores like 82, 85, 90, 92, whatever, like it's very good. It's very, very difficult to overcome that with the rest of your lineups. And so for me, when it comes to slates like this, I just lock in Luka. I lock him in as the captain, and doing that gets me overweight on the field because like unless Luka underperforms, which it's very, very rare that a player like him as the main driving force of the team in a situation like this like is truly underperforming. Like we're talking about like his SaberSim projection being 64. Like him even at like 55, 60, 52. I mean, maybe you're starting to run into it, but if
that might even be impossible. We don't even know because we haven't seen that happen for a game that ever matters. He's like literally his projection tonight. I'll just say it should be 70. So like I would manually change that to 70. A must-win game 2 after his worst game. Like it's going to be 70. It should be 70 as a median. Sorry.
No. I mean, I'm with you. Like truly outside of an injury, like he doesn't score less than like 60 realistically.
Right.
And so like I'm locking in Luka today. And at that point, this one is a lot less fun because I'm paying up for Luka. That means I'm going to be playing like all these scrubs down here. The only one I'd be a little concerned about, and yet again, like, the optimal in the big GPP last night had a guy that scored 0. So maybe personally, I need to be more open to that. I've always been very hesitant on taking zeros, but if you looked at like the NCAA championship tournament, the optimal lineup had a 0 in that situation. So we see zeros come in more and more, especially when you're having to pay up for somebody. So personally, like if I'm playing Daniel, I would play him expecting a 0, and I would personally cap my ownership. If I'm playing 20 lines, I'd probably only want him in 3 or 4 because I think I can land on the optimal with 3 to 4, taking the 0 with Daniel, but I don't want to just throw my lines away.
I would probably lean more towards just not playing him, considering he's now officially the third string center. He's probably not going to play at all. And there's 2 guys who are not that much more expensive in Josh Green and Mason Plumlee than him, who at least we know they're going to play. And there's already been the speculation I mentioned about Josh Green is going to get there's rumors that he's going to get more playing time. And that's real stuff. This is GM talk. These are, I listen to every freaking basketball podcast in the world. Mason Plumlee is actually a part of their rotation. So, and Amir Coffey is a little more expensive, but Dante Exum at 2K is another one that is definitely going to play minutes. With Tice, I think it's like just as likely he doesn't play 1 minute as he does play tonight. That's just my personal take. So he would be one I would actually feel comfortable Xing out, personally.
So and this is just me thinking out loud. This isn't like you're wrong or this is my opinion or whatever.
Yeah.
So now that you say that, because yet again, I don't know anything about these guys.
Yeah.
I see that he's 1,600 and not 1,000, like I thought he was. I would be playing him expecting a 0. If you truly don't think like he would play, like I would lean towards like understanding you because like again, this stuff. But with these builds, I'm okay taking a 0 from $1,000 player.
See, I get it. If there's not much of a price gap between Tice and a guy we know is going to play, unless you're playing them together, like Dante Exum, I would just pay the 400 more for guaranteed production versus, you know what I mean? It would almost be forcing to take the 0. But if he was 1,000 directly and nobody else was, then it would come into play. Like that's why it worked out for the guys last night, because the 5 studs scored all the other points. Yeah. And who do they pick?
So these builds that I mean, this is the big contest, or like, but I see like builds like this in the mini max as well with a 0. Like this is a big brain play. Like huge respects to Stingray for running a fucking train with this. Like good for him. But like same thing with like adapting to esports and stuff. Like I've learned that I need to embrace either taking like a super low scoring guy or just like the cheapest like value in a game where I'm going to be playing Luca in the captain, like 100%. Like I'm okay trying to find 0s. And so yet again, I haven't even really discussed the rest of the 4 players that would be like, I mean, I have this as like last night, but like today would be like Luca. I haven't even talked about who the 4 people are. I'm more so thinking about lineup construction and builds of what getting the 0 at 1,000 get you. And that's why NBA Showdown is so different from like NFL Showdown, because you would never like that does not work in NFL. You cannot.
Although it did work for the guy who won the million. He won the million on the Showdown like right before the end of the year. He played a guy who wasn't even on the roster.
Was it for 200? I'm assuming.
No, it was for $1 million for first.
No. Like player salary in that slate. Like was that?
Oh
like
yeah, 200?
Yeah. Then like, that's NFL's certainly rare. That's certainly one that I probably would never chase. Same thing with like playing backup quarterbacks and stuff. I think it's equivalent to that. But like at NBA, we do see, or basketball rather, we do see it happen more than a lot of people want to give it credit for. And and I get pissed like when I see that. I'm like, really? This guy runs a train here, and I'm playing right. I'm playing the way I should. Everybody's scoring lines, and I'm finishing.
Oh man, that's a sick lineup too.
So like, I mean, that's how I build. Like this is the main one last night. Like you can see I played Gabe because he was the cheapest guy that I figured would be playing and stuff, and I get beat by a guy who scores 0. And so like I always say, like, your process always needs to change. I know a lot of people's like first intro to me on the site was like, oh, I'm gonna fade McCaffrey in the Super Bowl, or like I hope he gets injured. But like this is how I approach like the actual thing I love about DFS is like analyzing how lineups can be built and stuff. And that's why like I don't even pay attention to players at all. Yeah.
No, I totally hear you. I think that what was different, and I think that when it matters, like last night. So also I remember now somebody won the Showdown in the playoffs in football where they captained a player with 0 who ended up with a 0.
Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah.
Because that was the only other way you could get in Mahomes, et cetera. You know what I mean? And everybody else on both sides, and Josh Allen, all that stuff. So taking those ones I definitely get. But the only thing I was saying tonight is that if they're bunched up in pricing and you can find a way, like again, 1,000, that's a different story. The minimum is a different story than than 1,600 versus 2,000, because then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, Dante Exum might put up 20 fantasy points tonight. In no world is Daniel Tice supposed to play at all tonight. I'll just take the extra. I'll find a way to do the other 400 thing, because if you tried to force in like the cheapest guy, like Tice, who makes the least sense, who's at no ownership, the problem is then you're going to end up having him instead of the guy who's 400 more, who we know you're going to get points from. The only way you should play him is in addition to those type of guys, which is what the guy last night did, by the way. The guy who put the minimum, the guy who won it, he played Aaron Holiday at almost no ownership, who is also incredibly speculative as a play, who cost almost nothing. So you had to double spend down just to be able to get LeBron as a captain and still get Jokic in there with Russell and another middling Porter, another middling play. So it is interesting, and I love the same stuff. Sorry, I just got a message from my son. All right, I probably should get going pretty soon to get to my baseball builds. I haven't finished all my lineups yet, and I probably should do that and update the people before I get out of here. Is there anything else we should talk about, Brandon?
No, that's mainly it. I'll let you go ahead and go. I mean, I walked through my process for both these two showdown slates that I'm going to do. Thanks for having me on.
No, great, man. I know, dude. Anytime, I love it. It's great.
Yeah. Sorry that I just don't do the classic slates. I'm not any help.
No, I understand. It totally understand it, and we'll be doing more showdown going forward because there's not going to be much left in a couple weeks.
Yeah. All right then.
All right. Good luck, everybody. Thanks again to Brandon, and we'll see you guys in the Discord.